Bailey's Story, A Puppy Tale, Chapter 9. Over the next few days, the smells faded from my fur, and about the time I finally smelled like myself again, my family stopped behaving so strangely. They let me in the house, and I looked over my job of tasting, and I took over my job of tasting kitchen scraps. The boy called me Doodle from time to time, but I could tell he wasn't angry when he did. Want to go fishing, Doodle Dog? He'd ask, and we'd shove out in the rowboat and pull tiny fish out of the water for a few hours. One day, a chilly breeze swept in from a cloudy sky. Ethan pulled on a shirt with a hood that covered his head, and he called me to go down to the pond. We had been fishing for a while, and I was starting to wonder when we'd be going in for lunch when Ethan suddenly sat straight up. "I've got a big one, Bailey, a big one!" I leaped to my feet, barking. If Ethan was excited, so was I. Ethan wrestled with his rod for more than a minute, grinning and laughing, and then I saw it. A fish the size of a cat was coming to the surface of the water right next to us. Ethan and I both leaned forward eagerly to see it. The boat lurched under us and with a startled yell, the boy fell over. The boat rocked back when Ethan fell, throwing me to the bottom in a heap. I jumped up and peered over the side, down into the dark green water. I could see the dark form of the boy going down, vanishing from sight. The bubbles rising to the surface carried his scent to me, but he wasn't coming up. My boy was in trouble. I didn't hesitate. I dove right in after him, my eyes open as I pushed against the water, struggling to follow the trail of bubbles down in the cold darkness. I couldn't see much of anything. The water flowed into my nose, smoothed my fur, and flattened my ears against my head. The boy must be somewhere below me. I paddled as hard as I could, my front legs reaching, my back legs thrashing. Finally, I caught sight of him, a blurry image of murky shadows. I lunged, jaws open, and seized the hood of his sweatshirt in my mouth. Lifting my head, dragging him with me, I swam hard for the sunlight surface of the pond. We burst up into the air. "Bailey!" the boy shouted, laughing. "Are you trying to save me, boy?" He reached out and snagged the boat with his arm. Frantically, I tried to claw myself up over his body and into the boat so that I could pull him the rest of the way to safety. He was still laughing. "Bailey, no, you doodle dog, stop it." He pushed me away and I swam in a tight circle around him. I knew I shouldn't go far from him. "I have to get the rod, Bailey. I dropped the rod. I'm okay. Go on, I'm okay." The boy waved a hand at the shore as if he were throwing a ball that way. He seemed to want me to leave the pond. I wasn't sure that was a good idea. What if he went under again? At that moment he was talking and laughing, so I could tell that he was fine, and he kept waving me to the shore. Finally, I went and pulled myself out onto a small area of sand next to the dock to shake all the heavy water from my fur. "Good boy, Bailey," Ethan called. I looked around and saw his feet go up in the air, and an instant later he vanished under the water. With a whimper, I threw myself back into the water, swimming as hard as I could, my shoulders lifting all the way out of the pond with the effort. I had to reach Ethan. When I got to the trail of bubbles, I followed the scent. It was much harder to get myself down this time because I hadn't dived out of the boat, so I was slower to reach the boy. As I was headed toward the bottom of the pond, I glimpsed him beneath me, coming up. I switched directions, our heads broke free of the water and out into the air at the same time. "Bailey!" Ethan called in delight. He tossed his rod into the boat. "You are such a good dog, Bailey." I swam beside him as he pulled the boat over to the sand. He was all right. The water hadn't taken my boy away from me. I was so relieved that I danced and licked Ethan's face as he bent to pull the boat out of the pond. "You really tried to save me, boy." I followed him into the sand and shook myself again. Then I sat, panting, as Ethan left the boat on the sand and settled down beside me to stroke my face. His touch was as warm as the sun. The next day, the boy brought Grandpa down to the dock. I raced ahead of them to be sure the duck family was out of the water. The boy was wearing another shirt with a hood, this one light gray, and he paused next to Grandpa on the dock. I sat down too. All three of us looked into the green water. You watch. He'll dive underwater, I promise, the boy said. I'll believe it when I see it, Grandpa replied. Grandpa grabbed my collar. Go, he shouted to Ethan. The boy took off running. I strained to follow, and the grandpa let me go. Ethan sailed off the end of the dock with a huge splash. I skidded to a stop and barked, looking back at Grandpa. Go get him, Bailey, Grandpa said. I looked down at the frothy water where the boy had gone in. Then I looked at Grandpa again. He was old and moving pretty slowly, but I couldn't believe he was so daft that he wasn't going to do anything about this. The boy needed help again. Why was Grandpa just standing there? I barked some more. Go on, Grandpa urged me. Did I have to do everything in this family? With one more bark, I dove off the end of the dock, swimming down towards the bottom where I could just see Ethan's light shirt. I grabbed his collar in my jaw and headed for air. See, he saved me, the boy called when our heads broke the surface. Good boy, Bailey, Grandpa and Ethan shouted together. I was so happy with the praise and so relieved that Ethan was okay that I decided to take off after the ducks. They thought it was safe to get back in the water. I'd show them. I got so close to snapping off a few tail feathers that they flapped their wings and quacked. That meant I'd won. We spent the rest of the afternoon playing Rescue Me. After a few more times, I got less worried, since Ethan always came back up. Still, he was so happy every time I hauled him to the surface that I did it again and again. I couldn't see any reason why we'd ever leave the farm, but when Dad arrived a few days later, and Mom started walking from room to room, opening drawers and pulling things out, I had a feeling that we were going to be moving once again. I stuck close to Ethan in case he had any ideas of leaving me behind. He laughed at me and finally he yelled, "Car ride!" I dashed outside and jumped in the back seat, hanging my head out the window. The horse, Flair, stared over the fence, probably jealous because I could fit inside the car and she couldn't. Grandma and Grandpa hugged Ethan and me before we drove away. The car took us back to our first house. I missed the farm. It was good to smell the familiar smells once more and to meet the other kids and dogs in the neighborhood again. We played games and I chased balls and wrestled with my friend Marshmallow. It was wonderful. What happened the next day was not so wonderful. Everybody got up early and I was led out to the garage again. I thought the people in my family had learned their lesson. Why was this starting all over? I ran out of the dog door into the backyard and checked to see that Mom and Ethan were really leaving. They were. Ethan climbed into the big yellow bus and Mom drove away. This would never do. I barked for a while and Marshmallow answered from down the street, but that didn't help as much as you'd think. Since I couldn't think of what else to do, I went back inside and sniffed at the doghouse. I wasn't about to spend the day in there. I saw Smokey's feet underneath the door that led back to the house. I put my nose to the crack and breathed in his scent, letting out a frustrated sigh. He didn't smell sorry for me at all. I was a big dog now, bigger than I'd been the last time I'd been locked in the garage. The doorknob wasn't so far above my head as it used to be. As I looked at it, I remembered how I'd gotten out of the yard where I had lived with my mother. I put my front paws on the door, took the knob in my mouth, and twisted it. Nothing happened. I didn't give up, though. The knob was slippery in my mouth and the metal tasted bitter, but I tugged and pulled, wrestled with it, and suddenly there was a click. The door opened.